So what defines a world-class university or an institution? Over the last few months, I've had an opportunity to have several interactions with the presidents and vice chancellors of various universities in South Asia. And this question has been at the core of that discussion. Now, Ashwin had shared a lot of perspective from QS, which is one of the recognized global rankings. So I'll just share a perspective coming from Times Higher Education. So just to give you a brief overview, Times Higher Education, we have been there since 1971. We started off as a newspaper focusing on the higher education sector, and over the last few decades, we have been working with the global academic leaders as well as policymakers in supporting the higher education sector. We are best known for the World University Rankings, but in addition to that, we also organize a lot of events where we bring together all the leaders of the different institutions in higher education together. We also work in terms of internationalization on supporting the institution in building their brand profile globally, as well as in terms of addressing some of the key issues on the faculty recruitment, as well as providing data and insight through the editorial intelligence that we have gathered over the last few decades. Various policymakers have been working closely with us because of the expertise we bring in terms of the higher education and supporting them in overall improving the quality of higher education. And we are the only ranking agency which has been independently audited by PwC. Unlike a lot of the other ranking agencies, we work and partner with PwC in terms of making sure there is adequate transparency in the way we evaluate the different universities on a year-on-year basis. Just to give you a brief overview in terms of the methodology and demystifying what are the parameters that go in terms of evaluating the best universities in the world. So for Times Higher Education, there are three major sources of data that we look at. One is the performance data that we gather from the universities themselves. This would include information on looking at the institutional income, research income, information on the faculty, student, and other data that can only be provided by the institutions themselves. And for participation, we make it mandatory because we believe these are some of the critical parameters to fairly evaluate the performance of the universities. We also conduct a global academic survey with more than 10,000 academics globally, and we partner with Elsevier. And we ask them about the teaching and research reputation, and these are experts in their respective fields. So we ask them to tell us about the leading institutions that they believe in their own fields. The third kind of data we collect is the bibliometrics data. So we are working with Elsevier and using the Scopus database. So information in terms of the citations, research publications is gathered from there. And then combining these three sources, we compute the overall rankings and the scores. Last year, we had almost 1,500 institutions which participated in the rankings and submitted the data to us. And more than 3,500 institutions were voted for. And we also analyzed more than 62 million citations in terms of the course of the evaluations. And we do have 11 subjects breakdown as well. So on top of the overall rankings, what we do is we also break it down by subject-wise rankings. And there are 5 key aspects that we try to focus on when we are looking at the performance of the universities. So that would include teaching, research, citations, industry income, and international outlook. And we are perhaps the only global ranking body which looks into detailed parameters. So we go into 13 different metrics linked to the 5 key aspects of evaluation. And we try to assign different weightages. So just in a nutshell, teaching is about 30%, which is linked to 5 parameters. Research is 30%, that is linked to 3 metrics. Citation is 30%. International outlook is 7.5%, and industry income is 2.5%. And we want to make sure that there is adequate representation of academics who vote in the surveys globally. So from this distribution, you can see about 1/3 of the academics who voted for the different universities come from Asia. And in terms of the criteria, so we do want to measure the best universities in the world. One of the speakers earlier did mention that rankings are a benchmark of excellence, and that is what we strive for. So we try to rank the top 1,000 universities globally each year in university rankings, and the criteria is that the institutions need to publish at least 1,000 papers over a 5-year period with a minimum of 150 papers, need to teach both undergraduates as well as the graduate disciplines, as well as focus on multiple disciplines and not just single discipline. And these rankings are focusing on the research-led universities, and that is why some of the parameters designed are taking those factors into account. Now, just to give you some insights on the Indian higher education from a ranking point of view. So if you look at the last year's ranking, we had about 42 Indian universities which were ranked in our rankings. And the best institute was the Indian Institute of Science, which had a ranking between 250 to 300. Now, if we look at the characteristics of world-class universities, this graph here shows you the average across the 13 metrics of all the universities taken all together. But if we focus on some of the more top and leading institutions of the world, what we will see is world-class universities are not those that excel in each and every parameter or metrics. They are institutions which are in the top 100, but they are only excelling or being the best of the best in only certain metrics. And that is an important aspect to look at. So even the best institutions have their key strengths, and that is something that they try to leverage on. And that is one of the insights we are able to get from the data that we gather from the institutions. If you look at India in terms of the performance, we do see that between 600 to 1,000, there have been increasing number of Indian institutions which are coming up. In the last year, the Indian institutions did improve in 10 of the 13 metrics. So we do see a lot of encouraging signs that in India, and especially with the government initiative with the institutions of eminence, which I think Dr. Mahendra Reddy also mentioned earlier in his presentation, we believe that things are moving in the right direction. A lot of Indian institutions are waking up in terms of what are the challenges, how to address, and of course, there's no short-term solution to this, and it will take a lot more investment, a lot more dialogue, and that's what we strive to do, is to work together with the institutions and the policymakers in helping address some of those key issues and helping them make these longer-term strategies. And if you look at the performance of India in further detail, so overall, India currently lies in the second half of the pack. But one of the strengths that we have found among Indian universities in terms of the teaching element, so India does score higher in the teaching aspect, which is linked with the 5 metrics. When it comes to research, I think there's still a lot of opportunities that can be looked at for Indian universities, especially in terms of having more collaboration, having more co-authorships with international authors as well. In terms of citations, I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of making sure that there are more publications per academic staff. The one aspect that I would really like to highlight is the international outlook. That is one area that we have consistently seen that the scores have been low for Indian universities. And industry income is also one area that has been relatively well, and which we believe that all the institutions should continue to build on to have more academic and industry partnerships and also incorporating those elements into the curriculum. Now, if we look into comparison of India with the global, we can see that when it comes to some of the teaching metrics, for example, having the PhDs, India actually does rank among the highest. But there are the other metrics which is looking on the international outlook in particular, as well as on the research aspect, where the Indian universities do not tend to fare as well compared to the other global universities. When we compare it to Asia, we can see a similar analysis where the Asian universities in general still tend to do a bit better. And then if you look at China, and China is also an emerging economy like India, but we do see that significant efforts have been made in China, especially in terms of the internationalization front. And that is something we as an Indian society, the policymakers, as well as institutions need to look into further. And then if you look into other BRIC countries like Russia, we do a similar analysis. So in terms of defining world-class institutions, what we observe is that those best institutions have a clear characteristics in terms of their international outlook. They have very well-established research practices. They have greater collaborations. Professor Christopher earlier was talking about the experiences and how the neural network works. Having more international faculty, more international students, and a diverse discussion and the teaching environment does play a role. And if we look at the Indian universities, they do tend to fare better in some of the metrics on the teaching, but the international outlook, again, is somewhere that needs to be addressed. Now, these rankings are focusing on the research-led institutions. We do understand that in India, there are also other challenges, especially in terms of the teaching front and also the social ecosystem. What we are also trying to do is to look on the teaching parameters as well. So we did launch the teaching rankings in the US with the Wall Street Journal, looking into the employability of graduates. And this is something we're also looking to launch on a global scale, and also where we hope that more Indian universities can feature in the near future. So this is just a brief overview and a perspective coming from an international ranking point of view. And I'll be happy to take any questions offline after this.